But let's get into a story that I think is incredibly important. This one blew my mind. Not because it's surprising. I totally would have guessed this was happening. But the fact that this is now out there really needs to shake some people free from the mainstream propaganda machine and see what's really happening, especially in regard to this chief ally, Israel, and the Zionist-controlled entity there and what's really happening and how they're completely overcoming our political process. While then passing laws that make it impossible for us to even speak out about that. Because, freedom, democracy. But the next article coming from RT, powerful, entitled, Most Valued Partner. NSA fed Israel intel for targeted assassinations, leaked docs show. Now that, again, this title I feel like buries a lead. There's a huge part of that they didn't include. Which is what we're going to get to. That not only did they give them this information, but they also just happened to give them all of your information too. Because that's what, government entities are supposed to do. Give away their citizens' data to foreign countries. Liberty, democracy, freedom. Hooray. Now, the NSA did give Israel access to all U.S. citizens' communications data, according to the newly leaked documents. And that should chill you to the bone. Now, frustrated by a legal ban on sharing intelligence with Israeli operatives, conducting targeted assassinations against Hezbollah, because that's legal, right? Just killing people because you don't like them. The NSA crafted a loophole giving them total access, even to U.S. citizens' data, according to these new leaked documents. Now, the Israeli SIGINT, I believe, it's SIGINT, if it's even supposed to be spoken like that. Maybe it's just called SIGINT. The national unit, ISNU is what it's called. Or, as I referred to before, we're talking about the Unit 8200, basically the NSA's counterpart in Tel Aviv, convinced the U.S. government to circumvent the legal prohibition on providing surveillance data for targeted assassinations during Israel's 2006 war with Lebanon, according to the newest revelation from the archives obtained by whistleblower Edward Snowden. Now, using the familiar rationale, the scapegoat, the classic loophole that they always use of just screaming terrorism, to, of course, execute cooperation that they knew was illegal, the NSA and ISNU found a workaround, essentially, using the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the ODNI, that provided the Israelis with all the intel they needed, according to an October 2006 article in the NSA's internal publication. I mean, this is groundbreaking information. To realize that this is happening either shows you that the NSA is completely rogue, or this is what the U.S. government ultimately wants. Now, the author of the leaked documents, whose name is redacted, of course, details the, quote, late-night, sometimes tense discussions he had with ISNU officials who believed they deserved an exemption from the U.S. prohibition on abetting targeted killings. So here's a very clear, pattern we can see. The Israel feeling something should change and the U.S. hopping to and changing it. Not concerned about the legal ramifications or the, exposing U.S. citizen data to Israel operations. No, who cares? Israel wanted to change. The U.S. steps up and says, no problem, Israel. A very alarming pattern that Americans need to come to terms with. Now, the documents don't include details of what arrangement was eventually worked out with the ODNI. But the Israeli military used American data to lay waste to Lebanon's civilian population. Again, this is complicity in very serious war crimes. But, if you're powerful enough and got a big military, these things don't apply to you. They laid waste to Lebanon's civilian population, much like the tech-enabled U.S. troops in Afghanistan and Iraq, whose kill counts swelled with civilian victims after they received access to, guess what, NSA targeting data. Because clearly their goal seems to be giving them information on how to kill more people, how to kill more civilians even. Now, it says, quote, Israel repeatedly, and in some cases egregiously, violated the laws of war. That's according to Human Rights Watch reporter Nadim Houri, speaking with The Intercept, adding that the Israelis, quote, engaged in indiscriminate aerial attacks and cluster bombing against, quote, civilian infrastructure that was not tied in any way to the armed conflict. What does that remind you of? It should remind you of exactly what's happening in Yemen right now, exactly what they did in Syria, exactly what they did in Iraq, exactly what they do. And we're supposed to be shocked at this. This should be alarming, but it should not be surprising. This is every single field of war we can look at that they've been responsible for. Speaking on the U.S. oligarchy, the Zionist-controlled government here in Israel, as well as their lapdog Saudi Arabia, this is what they do. They have continued to lie and pretend that they're fighting for good and freedom and pretend that they're defending themselves when they have to attack. And at the end of the day, you look back 20 years later and the country is decimated. Massive civilian casualties. But we just ignore that somehow. I don't even understand how it's possible. But we do. And here's another example of, with NSA support, with United States government support, Israel went on to cluster bomb, civilian infrastructure that was not tied to the conflict in any way. Indiscriminate aerial attacks on civilians. All wild war crimes and international law violations, but they simply don't care. Just like they don't care in every other thing we point out. Now it says this strategy had a name. They called it the Dahaya Doctrine, I believe. And Israeli officials admitted, actually, see, and this is where I love this stuff. So there's somebody probably in the chat right now hearing this going, oh, that's fake news. That's not real. Israel would never do that. But guess what? Israeli officials admitted it was deliberate. But despite this brutality, they were unable to even win the war anyway, which is history. If you're familiar with the war, you know. But the reality is that they admitted that they deliberately targeted civilians, that they deliberately targeted civilian infrastructure, even had a name for the doctrine. And of course, but because we know this is what happens, they were charged with war crimes, they went to jail. Oh, no, that's not what happened. Nothing happened. They admitted to openly committing war crimes with U.S. help, and nothing happened. I'm shocked, just like we're seeing today. Now, apparently unsatisfied with the legal loophole that the Americans had created for them, they always want more, the Israelis sought and received full, complete access to the NSA's massive surveillance data troves after the war. All the things they pretended they didn't have up until very recently. And the things we only know about because of people like Manning and Assange and Snowden, the very people that they're all currently prosecuting. But at the same time, ask yourself how many people that they actually prosecuted for the crimes committed by the NSA that they revealed to us. Oh yeah, none. Or what about the crimes they revealed to us in Iraq? None. The crimes they revealed? None. None anywhere. All the things that these whistleblowers showed to us, not a single person has been charged with the crimes that no one denies were crimes. But every one of them has been prosecuted for revealing the truth to the American citizens. Because that's what happens in a free country. And now here we're looking at the NSA giving full access to your data to the NSA equivalent in Israel. Because Israel said, that's not enough for us. We want more. And they said, here you go. Now, in 2009, a memorandum of understanding officially gave the ISNU, the Israeli group, unrestricted access to the NSA's raw intelligence data, including, of course, the phone and internet records of American citizens. And citizens of third-party countries, too. Only American officials' data was supposed to be excluded, right? Because, that makes me laugh out loud. So they're handing over your data to these people, but then putting a caveat that says, no, you can't do that with us, though. Very clearly acknowledging that this is not okay, that nobody wants their data exposed. They'll clearly kind of couch this in the idea that it's, because they're American officials and there's national security, blah, blah, blah. No, it's because they don't want their data being exposed by this group. The very same thing that Americans would want too, but they don't seem to care about the people that they're supposed to be acting for. Your constituency. But of course, they said, no, the U.S. officials' data was excluded. But it was on an honor-based system, which I think is laugh out loud ridiculous. With the ISNU instructed to destroy upon recognition, it says, any records originating with a government official. Which I'm sure they did that. I'm sure this wasn't used to further influence our political process. That's just unbelievable. Now, almost no strings were attached to this bonanza, as the article calls it. The Israelis could even release the identities of Americans whose information had been scooped up in the dragnet. And this is completely okay with the U.S. government. And as long as they have asked the NSA for permission first, apparently, and could pass the data on to anyone at all times if the names were redacted. This should make you sleep sound at night, all snug and tucked in, knowing that your government cares absolutely not about your security and your privacy. As long as it's the Israeli government, who we can see doesn't do anything wrong anywhere. This is just staggering to me. And I really hope that this breaks through to some people that are here even trying to fight against what we're saying, to see that this is what they do. And if you're willing to just completely ignore this as the idea that, well, they're both good guys, then you're completely lost and missing the point. Because it just completely just ignores all of the actions they've taken, which clearly counter this good guy narrative.